Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Financial Transformation Live. And usually, you may notice we're a minute or so behind, some technical difficulties, but big thanks to my team here at ITAS who absolutely got me sorted, and we are up and running. So today's topic, if you've forgotten, is all about gathering financial requirements for your potential new system or implementation. So I'm going to take you through that today. I've also got a few bits of announcements, so we'll go through those quickly first. So today's session is going to be all about how we at ITAS approach gathering requirements. Some caveats to this: obviously, as consultants, one of the hardest things about doing these sessions for me as a consultant is actually putting frameworks and trying to give you this information in a way that you can go away and apply it. So I have said already to the team, I think there's going to be a round 2 of this as I start to work through the frameworks, but hopefully this is going to add some value and this is the approach that I take as a consultant when we go out, and very often we'll do sort of scoping as it were, sort of prior to making a decision around which Sage product is right for that customer. I'm just going to do a quick recap as well of options for system strategy, because for me that's a key part of how you approach your requirements as well, and share some top tips and things to think about as you go through that. So obviously running late, I forgot to do the introduction. So hello, my name is Hannah, and I am Managing Director, but also a transformation consultant here at ITAS. So we as a partner are work across the Sage product range. So we work with Sage Intact. I've won numerous awards. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we're actually considered one of the top partners in the UK for Sage. But actually, the bit that I get really excited about is not always just the products we sell, though those are very exciting, but actually for me it's all about how we bring the transformation to life and help finance teams achieve the objectives, which is why I do these sessions, is taking you through the consultancy bit that we wrap around the amazing software that Sage provides. So if you are listening to this live, please say hello. We'd love to know who's actually listening to this live. I know a huge amount of people watch this on demand, so if you're listening to this on demand, if you find the session useful, please do feedback. If there's things that you would have liked to seen in it, any content you would like to, or questions that you have following it, please do message me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM, or you can email me, hannah.munro@itassolutions.co.uk. I love to get direct feedback. It just helps me develop and build these sessions out into something that's really useful for our community. Okay, so quick offer actually for those that are interested. So I've been doing these financial transformation live sessions for well over a year now, and we've covered a huge amount of ground. And one of the pieces of feedback I had is that that's great, but people have some questions around their specific scenarios. So I freed up some slots in my diary. I have 2 that are available for anyone that would like to use them. So it will be on a first come, first served basis. So if you've got a month-end timeline map that you want to look through and get some advice on how you can improve it with your current systems, or things that you could think about, then let me know. If you're going through a requirement gathering and you want an independent eye over what you're putting together and things to consider, I'm happy to use that for that as well. So this is just an open option for all of our Transformation Live attendees and also our podcast listeners. If this would add value to you as an organization, then please do reach out. The links are going to be in the chat now, and also in the podcast show notes. And and if you obviously want to book that in, let us know, and we'll do that. So I will have a limited amount of slots, just as a heads up, because I have a day job outside of this session. But yeah, hoping that is going to add some value to our community as well. Okay, so last session that we did on Financial Transformation Live was building out your finance data strategy, and it's really, really pertinent given the topic that we're talking about today. And as I go through, you'll notice that there's a reason that this one is at the end of the year, right? Because everything we've been doing throughout the year and over the last sort of 12 to 18 months is all about building up to this kind of view, because the skills that you need to actually do effective requirement gathering are consultant level skills around process mapping, around digging into your reporting and Excel spreadsheets needs. All of those things actually really help with this process. So the last one we did was around finance data strategy, again, is a great precursor to this. And as we go through, as usual, standard format, if you've got any questions, then please do ask, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as we go through and make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so how do we approach? So when I'm going out, so I've, and I'm seeing it more and more, is that people want to be really confident in the Sage solution choice that they're making. And so actually what they want to do is do more upfront scoping and digging prior to actually, signing on the line. And it's great if you have the budget to do so. And so if I talk about how we approach this, when we do those kind of sort of pre-purchase scoping sessions, and then hopefully you as individuals will be able to take this away and apply a subset of this to your team internally. So the things that I'm looking at are kind of the core functioning areas of finance. Yep. So I'm looking at what are the reporting requirements? Yep. What does the business need to get out of the system, and how do they want to consume that information and use that information? I'm looking at the core sort of AP and AR processes from start to finish and the use cases that go with that. I always like to look at a month-end map, because it's really interesting how much inefficiency comes into that month end. And one of the measures of success of finance to a business is their month end, the time to month end, the time to produce accounts. So that should be a key part of any requirements gathering. So where are the blockers? And if you get it down on paper, it's a lot easier to pick it out. And then integration mapping. So how does your finance solution and your need to talk to and work with the other solutions? Do you need some additional layers to support that as well? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the process I would recommend you go through in order to put together an effective set of requirements. Okay, so let's start with the first one, reporting requirements. So there is a tendency when I get a list of reporting requirements for it to be based on what people do now. And for me, I think that's a big mistake. So what's important is that you future-proof whatever system you're going for as much as possible, bearing in mind like the rate of change is accelerating, right? So you want to try and think ahead wherever possible, right? And ask the question, what is it that you would like us to do in finance to the wider business that we aren't able to deliver for you now? Okay, so and particularly when it comes to reporting and analysis. So I like to run workshops with different levels of individuals, because obviously the reporting requirements at the top level and the visibility and the depth that they want can be quite different at an operational level. So it's important to run that. And also try and challenge them, rather than saying, right, this is what we do now, what do you want changing? Try and start wherever possible with blue sky thinking, like no preconceived notions. If I could wipe the slate clean and start again, what would you value and how would you want to consume that information? So you need to think about, think about it across products, across divisions, across types of employees, types of customers, types of brands. What is think of it as like the ways you want to slice, dice, and filter your reporting. What are those things that you need to be able to do? Because that will help you understand the level of data hierarchy that you need in your finance system, and also the maturity of that system, right? Because some finance systems, their general ledger is more mature than others, right? So that's a really important piece. So do run workshops with your stakeholders. Do ask them to, give you some ways of thinking about your reporting, and do ask them what they're going to ask you for in 5 years, right? Where do they think the business is going to go? How do they think it's going to change? What's the depth of information that if they had no limitations, you could provide? Another good way to understand reporting requirements is to understand what you're currently doing now. Is kind of do a check and a balance, because it's all very well focusing, and I will keep pushing you to focus on where you want to be, but also understanding the key components that are working or are in existence right now is also important. So do that spreadsheet assessment, digging in to the spreadsheets. And if your operational or your management executive team are taking the information you give them and putting them into other spreadsheets, then that's a conversation, right? To have. You also need to think about not just the regular reporting, but think about the ad hoc reporting that you as a business need to produce, and make sure that the capabilities that supports goes into your requirements. you need to consider both obviously the data architecture requirements. So like what levels do you need to be able to slice and dice, but also how do you want to display and consume that information? So I have some people that say, we want to produce a management pack and this, and thinking about that, if that's a requirement. Others want to build a more real-time pull element rather than the push element with their business, right? And I have to say it's my preferred approach, but each their own. And the ability to pull dashboards and information out on demand. So then you need to have interfaces that support that. And if you are going to do that, you need to make sure that they are easily editable. The last thing you want to do is be in an expensive conversation with a consultant where they're constantly having to build dashboards. You need to think about how you want to manage the ongoing requirements, because dashboards can take a life of their own. So you need to think about that and drill down requirements as well, because a lot of systems will have like top level views, but actually, once somebody sees something, they're not quite sure if they want to understand it. How do they get down to those levels, and what's the level of detail that they need to get down to? And also, you need to challenge your stakeholders if they're saying, right, I want to be able to get down to the absolute, source information, like the email the customer sent through with the quote. You need to challenge that, right? What is a reasonable level of expectation for your finance system? What's the ideal versus what's the minimum? And thinking about everything that every requirement is in, what is the nice to have? What's the ideal scenario versus what is the minimum requirement we need to work to, and make sure that is reflected in your requirements that you're putting forwards. We've talked a little bit about how do you want to slice and dice your data. Make sure you understand like the types of reports like you want to be able to slice and dice by and be specific. So I want to be able to pull a P&L and analyze it by customer industry. Yeah, here's an example of the sorts of reports I want to pull. Because if you just say I want to be able to analyze by customer industry, then you might get a transaction report that can be analyzed by customer industry, but you won't be able to do your P&L by that level. So again, being specific and clear is really important when certainly when some things are hard and fast requirement. And just make sure, just a reminder to look at all of the different levels. So think about your executive and management reporting. Think about your operational reporting and how you want that interface with finance. How much data do you want to share? Thinking about compliance reporting, so tax-based reporting, gap reporting, all those kind of things. Yep. And functional reporting, things like, pulling off aged debt lists, and with memos, etc. So looking at all of your levels of reporting and almost documenting what it is that you're looking to get out, and because that gives whatever partner or whatever software you look at a way to understand, like what the dream looks like. Now, I would also, and we'll talk about this a bit, but I would go through a prioritization piece, like what's the nice to haves versus essential, and be really strong on, if it isn't essential, it's just a really strong must-have. Be clear on that, right? And again, I'll talk about that later. And reporting skill set. So a lot of people will say, I want the ability to, build dashboards, right? But think about the ease of use of building dashboards, right? Do you have the right reporting skill sets within your team to do it? Have you got people that are comfortable building SQL views and, highly complex calculations, or are your users more at a level where they need like a drag and drop builder? And understanding and being open and honest about your internal capabilities and how you're going to support the building of reports for any new system that you choose is really important. So have a think about the level that you think the reporting software needs to be at to actually support your users, and how you want to manage the ongoing piece. Because there's kind of, I've seen the absolute extreme. So I've seen some companies that will have a dedicated, like reporting analyst that is technical enough to build SQL views and write complex M queries and etc. And that's brilliant. So, you can kind of choose, you've got an open season on what reporting tools, because they're fairly technical. I've seen the opposite, where they actually they don't want to build anything themselves. They want to be served with reports. So there is a bit about being clear that you need to have that whoever you go on as a partner, it's more a requirement for the partner. They need to have the skill set to build reports, and you need to have the budget to support that. Yeah. And then somewhere in the middle, which is again, where I like a finance team to be enabled, but I don't necessarily expect them to have a finance analyst on tap. The lucky ones do, but somewhere in the middle is I need reporting tools that are easy enough to use for a standard finance user. So not somebody that's particularly overly analytical or, in that sort of arena, but someone in the middle ground. And that again will guide your requirements for your reporting. Procure to pay. So this is one of the core processes that I always like to map out. So mapping out the end-to-end process. So, starting all the way from like the initial requisition or the initial intent to purchase something, how does that go through all the way to the payment being made? So things you need to consider as you go through this part of the process is types of purchases and the use cases around those purchases. So I'm a big believer in being really specific. So think about like overhead purchases, right? Are you going to go through from purchase requisition through? Are you just going to go straight through from purchase invoice and you would need an approval mapping for that? And what does that approval mapping look like, etc.? So really thinking through your different types of use cases for different types of purchases and different types of purchase requests. Think about the types of users and how they will need to access. So what do they need to access and how do they need to access is really important, and mapping that out. Do you need people that can enter a purchase rec and then convert that to a PO and send it out? Do you actually want that to sit within finance? And how do you want them to be able to do it? Like, is a mobile access essential? In reality, if they're spending like 8 hours a day at a screen, in my opinion, it's not, but it is important if you've got a lot of people out on the road or on site with customers. That becomes a different conversation. So thinking about types of users and access and, user expectations. Yeah. And then I guess almost like an assessment aspect to that is how easy it is and intuitive it is to use, especially on purchasing, because you're going to have a lot of non-finance users getting into the system. So once you've figured out like your end-to-end process for each part of the process, assessing authorization points, control points, and approval matrices for each of those as well. So if you've got one approval matrices for your purchase order, do you necessarily need that level of authorization again at purchase invoice? So thinking about like what are options around that. So, and there is also a point is that if you don't have something set in stone, make that clear. So this is what we're thinking, but this is an area where we're open to change and discussion. Yeah. And again, as you go through this, is that you need to think not just now, but what you're going to want in the next couple of years. So thinking forwards, and what you're currently doing may not be how you want to do it. And when people say, well, why are you mapping out the current process if actually that's going to change? I say, because it gives you an idea of where the challenges are and what it currently looks like. And then you can look at that and go, what would I change if systems weren't a barrier? If I could redesign this from scratch, where would I look at? And I think it's always good to give yourself and your future, software partner an option to help you rework this, right? Because I see a lot of people try and do the end goal themselves, right? And actually they don't understand what is best practice in their industry, or maybe they don't understand what the software could do. And so I like to have an option for like, this is what we currently do, this is what we'd like to do, but we're open to discussion around this. And actually we'd value you as a consultant to support us through this process. So that's kind of where I think it's important. But actually, in order to give your consultant the best chance and to minimize the amount of time they need to spend and the risk of missing things, giving them your current processes, giving them your current use cases, your current authorization matrix and your to-be authorization matrices is a brilliant way to enable them to give you good advice. Considering and thinking about formats as well. So if you have different integrations, maybe you're using a procurement software, understanding, if there's a formats, what formats do they use, what connection points. We'll talk about integration a bit later, but also how do your suppliers send you information? How do you receive information from them? How do you send them information? What do you need to be on your purchase orders when you send them? So thinking through sort of the sending and receiving, the formats, is it PDF? Is it Excel? What's going to work well? And again, thinking through all of this with a must have, should have, could have kind of perspective. And then we move on to the opposite ledger, so quote to cash. So again, I'd start with mapping out the end-to-end process, getting it down in a digital format. And for those that have forgotten, we have done a number of workshops on mapping out processes. So if you're not sure where to start there, I would recommend you jump into those sessions. And those sessions have both a sort of a mapping out your current process, and also how do you start to think about improving those processes, so you can look at it from two angles. Again, you'll notice this is a theme: use cases, right? It's the one thing I see missing on a lot of requirements documents that I received, is the use cases and the scenarios. And actually that tends to be where things fall down, right? So my one big tip is to focus on use cases and to make sure that you've documented those thoroughly for all of your core processes. Think about documenting your revenue recognition methods and any triggers you have for those and how you need that to work, especially any manual elements of that, and also thinking about the feeds in from the wider business in regards to revenue rec. Think about types of users again and how they're accessed and the method of accessing. Does it need to be mobile or browser friendly? Thinking about integration as well with your CRM. So how do you get from the salesperson, managing the sales cycle through to actually you receiving the sales order or the commitment to buy? What happens there? CRM integration, and I'll talk a little bit about integration at the end. Think about payment types. So how do you receive payments? How do you collect money? And where does that go? And again, think about formats for sending and receiving transactions, because it's no good implementing a new finance system if it cannot produce invoices in a format that mean that your customer will pay. So thinking about checks and balances, like if your customers require PO numbers, can the system support that? And what does that process look like? All of those good questions to ask as you go through. And that's why process mapping is really important. Because there is an assumption that as you look for a new system, that it just does some stuff as standard, and that isn't always the case. So it's really important you get to the detail with your processes and make sure you document each stage of the processes and the different scenarios that you might hit. Okay, so guys, just to say, I've not had a huge amount of questions so far, so I'm hoping this is all sinking in and making sense. But again, if there are, please do feel free to ask. It's great to get feedback as we go through these sessions, and I'll keep popping in the links. So I will pop in the link as well to the process mapping conversation, because that is a good one for you to pick up as a bit of a research piece before you start. Okay, month-end mapping. So I feel like I've covered this topic a lot, but again, this is an area that gets missed. So I got really excited actually the other month, because I asked a customer and I said, look, right, can I see, can we work through your month end? And they went, no, it's all right, Hannah, I'm on it. And they sent me through a cracking month end timeline map. So I knew all of the key tasks. I knew what working day of the month they were kicking in, and I knew how long they took, right? Because I had all the expected dates. So that was firstly really exciting, but it's a rarity. So actually helping because we're not talking CRM software here, like month end is a core part of finance. So making sure that you're talking about this with a potential provider, and you're documenting your requirements around improvements, this is really important. So I use this to identify where the time wasters or the time consumers at month end are. What are the tasks that take the longest, so I can focus there when I'm looking at requirements? Maybe it's bank rec, maybe it's something to do with the sales process. Maybe it's doing intercompanies or reconciliations, whatever it is. I can dig into that and I can understand that. And again, if you don't know the answer, because there is an assumption that if you, like, part of putting requirements out is there's an assumption that you have to give the answer to the problem. So you need to say, I need it to do this, right? So I personally think it's perfectly acceptable in a set of requirements to say, I need, like, this is my problem, but I don't quite know how to solve it. So my requirement is not, I'm not going to give you the answer as to how I want you to solve my problem, but I'm going to tell you the problem and allow you to give me thoughts and ideas of how we can improve this, right? And actually you want that kind of partner, because they're the ones that are going to challenge you through the cycle to help you. And as you implement, as you continue to use your system, they're the sorts of partners that are going to help you find ways through. So identifying the blockers and the problems. And I said, what is the problem that you're looking for the new system to solve, and make sure you're really clear on that. Things to look at are adjustments that can be automated, things like prepayments or revenue rec is a common one, or accruals, all of those things, like, if they take up a lot of time, let's put those in as things that need to be automated, or ideally could be automated. Think about reconciliations that take a long time. So that should be falling into some of your reporting requirements. So how do you stay on top, and how do you avoid errors in the first place? So a lot of finance teams spend an awful lot of time fixing things, right? That's where, checking things are right. And then when they aren't, finding problems and fixing them. So how do you create systems and processes that actually prevent the errors from occurring in the first place? And that's, again, a really great way to think about requirements. Look at your imports and your exports. Again, there's data being imported in, how much time does that take? Any issues with validations, all that kind of stuff. And make sure that you've got those key integration or imports and export capabilities documented. Because I have had people come and have a conversation, say, we've got this system, but we can't import this, right? So we have to change, right? So make sure you're clear on what do you need to be able to import, and what do you need to be able to export to support not just your month end, but any kind of integrations as well. Talking of integrations, so integration mapping. So I did a whole session last time on data design and building out your data strategy. But integration mapping is when we're starting to get into the nuts and bolts. So the first thing is, have you got a map of your current systems and also your ideal systems to be? Now, if you don't know what that looks like, that's fine. Just put a placeholder, yeah. But mapping it out is really important, both your current and your to be. Mapping out what you're expecting each system to contain, right? So if you've got a payroll system and you're doing expenses in there and you want to keep it, then make sure that your provider your person that you're speaking to about your requirements is aware. So mapping out the current and anticipated landscape. They may have, suggestions. That's why I say both. They may have suggestions. It might be that there's a module in their solution that can support it, but map it out. Map out the data points, so what data is stored within there and what functionality, so that you can see, and also map out what ideally with some arrows, is it bi-directional, is it single direction, what you're expecting to share. The amount of times I've seen requirements where you say, we want to integrate CRM with, good integration with Salesforce CRM, for instance. I'm like, yes, but what are you integrating? What objects are you using in Salesforce? What objects do you want to share? Where is that? So I can tell you, I can go back to them and say, this is how we integrate. We think it's a good integration, but what does good mean to you? Okay, so thinking about being really clear about your expectations, yeah, just like you would with if you're managing somebody, you say, this is how I'm going to measure your success. How are you going to measure the success of somebody meeting that requirement? Because then you'll get better answers and you'll get a more realistic view of how well a solution suits your business. Be clear on when you're building out your mapping. Is like almost like, think of it like if when you look at your current system, think about highlighting the stuff in red that needs to go, right? You're really not happy with it, okay? Highlight the stuff in orange that you're happy to keep, but you're not wedded to. And the stuff in green is it must stay, right? I'm not going to convince this sales team to change the CRM. That has to stay, and that has to, these are the boundaries around it. So thinking about your platforms, because you're not just choosing a finance software, you're actually designing a solution that works across a business. And that, again, you don't want to do this in a silo. You need to think about the wider connection to the business. For those platforms that you definitely want to keep or are thinking about keeping, make sure you have a conversation with them about their integration capabilities. So the sorts of questions you want to think about asking is, one, do you have an API? Are all the objects that I want to integrate available through the API? I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had where they said, yeah, we want to integrate, but the solution they want to integrate with doesn't integrate well. So then, it doesn't matter what finance solution you choose, you can't get at it, right? You've got to stick with Excel imports, and that changes the game, right? So make sure you do your homework with stuff that you want to keep, or you're thinking about keeping. Understand the type of connections they have and the breadth of those connections. So do they have an API? Do they have an export? Can they dump a file somewhere in some sort of FTP capability? Do they have all of the data sets that you're looking to connect? And make sure you're thinking about what objects do I want to sync? Yeah. And that will give you an idea. I'd also have a conversation with those ones that you want to keep about how open are they to building development, because that might change how you approach. Because if they don't want to do any kind of building, then you're going to need a solution whereby the other system is doing the heavy lifting and pulling, yeah. Or might need some kind of BPA software, so business process automation software, integration software to sit in the middle, so that you've got that flexibility there. So again, thinking about this, by doing these kind of like a little bit of due diligence before you go out to partners, you'll have a better, more realistic response, right? And you'll also be able to weed out the people that aren't going to be able to deliver a good job. Document shared data sets and how you want it to sync. I think we've covered that a little bit. Use cases. If I can say anything for this particular session, it's use cases, right? You need to know and understand your use cases. What happens if something, like for instance, if say you're using Salesforce, maybe you have 4 different opportunity record types, yeah? Or 4 different types of sales that go through. How does that impact your integration? So thinking about all of those scenarios that go around for each integration is really important. And you also need to think about what happens if something changes. So if a record changes, what is your expectation around how that system is going to sync? Yeah. And you might say, well, that's the partner's job to kind of figure it out. Absolutely. But if you go in kind of with this information, yeah, they will be able to help you get to the end goal a lot faster, especially if you're doing any kind of RFP process, right? That you want to give them as much information as possible, so what you get back is as realistic. And I was having a conversation with a consultant, and they were saying it's amazing how many responses they got for an RFP. Once they've gone through a more detailed like scoping and integration analysis, actually what they got out at the end was really different. Okay, so I like to think, and certainly that the partners that you're working with will do a lot of the pulling. Yeah. But if you do it this way, you're giving it to any partners you're speaking to. So you have to have less conversations, right? So the time that you're spent is almost refining where are the gaps, and they can then come back with a better answer and better thoughts on that. And then sort of, underlying all of the like process and data kind of requirements is some fundamental sort of technical basics, right? So how do you want it to be deployed? Are you looking at cloud, on-premise, hosted? What are you thinking? Data and security requirements. So where does the data need to be stored? Are there any ISO requirements that you have? What about two-factor authentication? All of those kind of things. What are the security requirements that you want to have within that solution? Thinking about backups and disaster recovery. So how is that going to be managed? What's the policies around that? And, what do you need to make sure you need? Try not, I think on that one is understanding what they do is probably a good guide versus saying, has to be backed up this many times, but making sure that you've asked that question, especially if you're going out for RFPs and things like that. User permissions and controls, right? And again, this can be one of those things where you need to be careful to decide what is a requirement versus what is a wish. Yeah. So what are the, what is your compliance requirement around user permissions and controls? And then what's the ideal in terms of internally being aware that you don't want to stop people doing their roles. And I've had that before where people have locked stuff down so much that every time somebody went to do something, it wasn't a great experience. So that's thinking about that. And then some kind of like platform capabilities around validation. So, if we want to continue to shift a faster month end, and, dare I say it, a continuous close, part of that is making sure that as data goes in, it goes in correctly. So what are the validation capabilities inbuilt within the system to support it, and what do you need? So you think about all those data objects we mapped out, like what is the validation that needs to happen? And then customization capabilities. I think the best systems that I've worked with, and the sort of systems I enjoy working with, are those that have a user level of customization. So you can add custom fields, you can add, you can tailor things. So understanding the kind of customization capabilities that you want to be able to do, the sorts of things that, like maybe you want the ability to amend invoice layouts yourselves, right? You want it to be easy to do. You don't want it to be like written in CSS or HTML. You want it to be easy to do. Maybe you want the ability to add a field into a screen. Can you do that as a user? Does that require some kind of coding or development? So thinking about those kind of customization and platform capabilities is really good when you're, again, thinking not just now, but longer term. And then that kind of leads me to like thinking about your overall system strategy. So, there is a bit about, you need to understand what you need before you decide on your strategy, right? You need to assess your current situation. So that's why I put it at the end. You could start with it, but almost, are you going for best of breed approach, which is where you like choose the modules that you want to use for each team or each function, and then just connecting them in? Or do you want one system that goes across all of the areas? And people say, well, of course I want one system, but there are pros and cons. And if you want to dig into that more, I would genuinely recommend that you go to our session on that. So when I actually talked about how you build out your finance system architecture, the pros and cons of both approaches. And I am genuinely biased because I work with both. Yeah. So I have a personal preference, and I have a preference that I think is more powerful, but there are pros and cons to both. And we work equally across in both environments. So I can genuinely say that I can speak to a customer and go, this is what you need to think about, right? So having that conversation is really important, and having that think before you go into a solution selection process is like, where do you sit? If you're open, then that's great. That gives you more option. But if you want a particular approach, then you're wasting time if you go to a provider that does something different. And then, of course, thinking your layers. So you'll notice that this kind of echoes the approach you take. So thinking about AP, core finance, AR, and any sort of external layers. Thinking about whether you need a business process automation or an integration layer, thinking about your reporting analytics, and then the last layer is normally a forecasting layer. So when you're thinking about your requirements, thinking in those layers and what you want, and also be really clear about what's essential now, right? Because you can go in to requirements with this is everything, but what do you actually need? And that kind of brings me to my top tips if you're going to be putting a set of requirements together, is think about what is working as much as you think about what is not working, because there is a danger that you focus on the problems and not actually what's operating well. You don't want to lose capability as you shift from one system to the other. And please don't assume that stuff that you can do now will be in your new system, because it's not always true. So think about what you do, what is working well and you do want and you're happy with, versus what's not working. Focus more on use cases, problems, and objectives versus a specific feature, right? Because there can be multiple ways to solve a problem, right? And it's not always the way that you've solved it historically at another platform. It may be that there's this capability that exists within the system that only exists in this one system, or you don't even know exists, right? So I'm a big believer, and one of the struggles I do have when I look at a lot of requirements is people don't give enough context around the use case, but also the problem they're looking to solve with this feature or functionality, right? So please do enable your software solution, consultant to help you figure out solve the problem, and give them the opportunity to use their expertise to consult with you and take you on this journey. Be really specific about use cases and give examples. So don't just say I need to manage contracts. Say I need support managing the deferred revenue, the billing, and the issuing of invoices for contracts. Yep. These are the 10 use cases that I work to. I have a 3-year quarterly billing. I have a 1-year weekly billing. I have, so, and here are the revenue recognition scenarios, and this is how I need it to work. Because you will get a whole different reaction if you do that, and any recommendations around modules or solutions will be way more on the ball, and hopefully you'll remove any non-contenders really quickly. Do share both your current processes and what you'd like to do in there, and if you are open to rethinking your processes and reworking it, have that conversation with your person you're giving the requirements to. Do prioritize. I have had some massive requirement documents that I don't think there's any system that does it well. Yeah, would never meet everything. So it is really useful, because a lot of the time, if you've got a massive requirements document that you're looking at and you're working through, you have to make a choice about whether you're going to put the effort into responding to it. And I've had a few scenarios where I've looked at something, there's a requirement in there, and I've gone, we can't meet that. So, and I have to have the conversation with that person to say, is this essential? Because if it is, I'm going to move away, and I've done that, right? But actually, you might miss out on a really great software. You might miss out on a really great partner, because you've not given an indication of this is the nice to haves, these are the essentials. And if you can't meet this, then there's no point, right? So I actually feel like making sure that you're really pushing and being fair and transparent with your potential partners about the requirements that you're looking for is actually thinking about, is this essential? And then you have a better way to judge as well. Rather than sort of having that in a scoring matrix behind, for me, that doesn't add value. And actually, this is a partnership, right? Normally, especially if they're a good partner, they want you to choose the right solution, because it should be a long-term relationship, especially in finance software, right? You're on it for years. So you want, part of that relationship is a give and take, and you want that to be a shared understanding of what's important to you. And also they can say, actually, no, we're not, but and in my case, I've actually recommended other solutions that I think can help, that are outside of our remit, right? So actually, that's a better way to work, in my personal opinion. And make sure I'm thinking about doing a session on how you go through selecting a software, like the key stages you should consider, and both a faster version and a less formal and a formal version, right? So that's a really important piece that we'll look at going forwards. But do allow your software providers and the consultants you're speaking with the opportunity to brainstorm with you. Yeah. So, because I think there's often more than one way to solve a problem. And sometimes having a fresh perspective and someone outside of the organization coming in and going, yeah, that's interesting. Could we do it this way? Is really important to drive that forwards. And a great comment there from Pavel, essentials are nice to have, because when you get costings from a a partner around the solution based on the requirements you give, there will often be trade-offs. So if you want a specific, a one piece of functionality, they may have to put in a certain module that's more expensive than another one, right? If you say that's kind of on the wish list, but it's not an essential, but these 3 ones are, then they may give you options. They may offer both a lower cost solution that has like 80% of requirements, and also a higher cost, more enterprise level solution that has everything, right? But then they're giving you choices. And again, that's about working in partnership, but you have to enable that. You have to give them the opportunity to understand like what is important to you. And just saying everything is important doesn't do anybody any good. And that unfortunately is how a lot of RFPs are designed. And then, we as consultants have to go through, right, tell us how important each of these are. And actually, you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle if you actually give that information up front. Okay. Requirement templates. So I am in the process of actually putting together some example requirement templates. I am working my way through various industries, and they are getting rather chunky. So you'll have to give me a bit of time for this. But if you would like to get these templates when they are delivered, then if you can basically, we'll gather those. So what I'm after is both, if you want to message me with your email address and the industry that you would like those requirement templates for, then that will help me prioritize, because the requirements templates for a manufacturing company will be, because they've got works orders and stock management, are very different from some, maybe a not-for-profit or a social enterprise that are more focused on revenue recognition projects and different kinds of reporting, right? So I'm looking to put together a series of templates around the different industries, because I've seen so many over the years, good ones and bad ones. So kind of collating those together, but it's a bit of a piece of work for me personally. So it's going to take me a few weeks to get on top of it. So if that would add value, please DM me with an email address in the industry. I'm not sure. You could also email me, hannah.munro@itassolutions.co.uk, and I will forward that through, and we'll keep a nice list of those. And as soon as they're ready, we'll send them out. And if I haven't got one for your industry, I'll either add it to my list, or I will make sure you get the generic one, which is kind of like the base template that I'm using for each. Okay. So, or if you would like us to reach out to you, just simply put a yes, please in the chat, and then we know who is interested, and I can reach out to you direct if you don't have me on LinkedIn or haven't got me on as a DM. Okay. For those on the podcast, we will have a little form for you to fill in as well, potentially. So do look out on the links for that as well. Okay. We've talked about building the requirements piece, but part of doing requirements is understanding like what kind of budget you have to play with and what the value of that change is. So we are going to do a session on building a business case. So if you're interested in that, then please do sign up. The link is in the chat for those watching this live, and of course will be in the show notes. And that is all about building a business case for your finance system. So we're going to talk through how you actually assess the value of all of the improvements that you're looking to make, and how you get buy-in from the wider organization. Because just because something is obvious to you personally doesn't mean that it's obvious to the wider exec. And certainly in challenging times, we are in challenging market conditions, especially at the moment for some industries. Some are absolutely flying, which is amazing, but some are having a harder time. It's important that any change you make has a good ROI and a value piece. And I'll talk to you about that in the next session. So we talked about how we approach gathering requirements, talked about options for system strategy. I gave you some top tips for putting and documenting requirements, and I told you also about how our requirement templates are on their way. So if you're interested, please do reach out or pop a yes, please in the chat if you're watching this live. If you are interested in exploring some options, so for those of you that don't know, we actually have a which Sage product is right for you quiz that you can do. So if you just want a top level indication of, capabilities. It's like a top level view, and it's literally a 5-minute quiz. We made it super simple, and that kind of gives us a base, and then we drill down into more when we're doing our sort of requirement discovery sessions. So that's something to have a look at. I've, as I mentioned, I've got the requirement templates download. So message me or fill out the form to request if you're interested. If you're at the point where you're like, I just need to have a conversation because I've got a lot of this in my head, but I want to talk through options. Do remember, we are here if you want to evaluate solutions, whether that's looking at your existing system to get more out of it or your new one. You know, we are here to support you. You know, we work across the Sage product range, everything from Sage 50 through to Sage 200 and Sage Intact. So, you know, please do reach out to book in discovery call. You can speak to us www.hightestsolutions.co.uk. You know, we are industry specific, so our consultants work across industry areas, so we can advise on how we've helped other customers similar to you and some of the changes they've seen. Brilliant. Well, I hope this has been useful and helpful. And again, as always, I love your feedback. I've had some really great feedback, and also some really good constructive suggestions for other sessions. So you'll see the content's changed a little bit because I've had some great suggestions for content moving forwards. Sophie has also, thank you very much, Sophie, popped my LinkedIn in the chat. So please do feel free to connect with me if you haven't already. Please do DM me with any questions you may have, any feedback you may have. It's always great to hear from you guys direct. And as is in the chat, a final reminder, if you would like to have a review of your requirements, if you've started this work and you kind of want some feedback on it, I'm happy to offer that free 1-hour session if you're interested. So please do jump on and book one of those slots. So thank you everyone for joining. It's great to speak to you all. And as always, I hope you have got something useful out of this, and I'll see you next time on Financial Transformation Live.